Hey guys, welcome back, and we are going to continue learning about HTML and CSS and what the two have to offer to us in our journey into web development. In our previous video, we started looking at using external style sheets to have more global styles across multiple pages. And so we would have looked at, implementing a global style for the H1 tag, for example. So anywhere there's an H1 tag on any page, it will have that maroon color, as you can see here. We also set other global styles for P tags and for other anchor tags in the nav bar, for other header tags, other places. So that was our previous activity. Now in this video, we want to start setting up our About Us page, and we want to have like a little tabular structure where we have like name on one side and then the information on the next side. So we'd want to have like the name, the address, the profile, date of birth, favorite color, those kind of things. We would want to display that kind of information on this page. Now, you have two options. You could try and put it in text. So you could probably put like a P tag, and I'll actually do it to show you what it might look like. So if I go to my About page, which I'm only printing a header tag that says About. So that's all I'm doing. But underneath that, if I wanted to start putting in name, I would probably try and put in like a P tag and then say name, colon, and then say my name. And then I would probably do that with each data point. So that's the P tag for name. Then I would have a P tag for date of birth, and then colon, and then you would say something like October, whenever. All right. But then the thing is, to me, this looks kind of untidy, because when this is going to render to me, it's just showing it all over the place. Name is over here, and then the value, there's no real distinction as to, apart from the colon. So I would probably want it in a bit more structured manner. And if you were to think about doing it in like Microsoft Word, you want it to have a structured way to say, data point on the left and the actual value to the right, then you would probably use something like a table, right? So I went over to Microsoft Word and did a quick mock-up of what this could look like. So let's just imagine that we had some structure, and then maybe we have the H1 tag inside the structure, maybe not. But then we have the table, we have the values to the left, and then we have we have the data points to the left, and then we have the values to the right. So that would be a table. So HTML actually allows us to create a similar structure when we need it. And that is what we'll be looking at today. So I'm going to go back to my About page and take out the code that I just put in, and then we're going to start over. So I'll leave this H1 tag with About Us page, and then under that, I will put in the table. So I'm just going to put in comments that's going to say table code here. All right, so you can see exactly where the table code begins. Now, the syntax for a table is pretty simple. But then, it's easy to make mistakes along the way and complicate it. But if you just pay attention to what you're doing, then your mistakes will be, far reduced. So let's just look at the structure real quickly. The first tag that's in a table tag is literally table. All right, so this is how you have to open and close. So you open table and you close it, and then you are going to define the actual structure of the table inside of the two tags. All right. Next up, every table has rows. So let's just go back to our table in Microsoft Word quickly. Notice that we have a row. Each line is called a row, right? So every table has a row. So to start defining the table, we need to define a row. All right. So then to define a row, we have a tag called TR, and that also has to be opened and closed. So I'm opening a row and I'm closing it. Now inside of a row, you have, there are two ways to look at it. You can look at it as a column. So this is one column, this is another column, or you can look at it as a cell. This is cell and cell. So if you're looking at it from Excel point of view, you know that you have cells inside of that grid. Right? So after defining the row, then you need to define each cell that goes in the row, or a cell can be seen as a column. All right. So then back in our code, having defined the first row, I'm going to say TD And then inside TD is where I put my actual data. So if I wanted 2 cells or 2 columns, then I need TD and TD. So each TD, I guess TD represents table data. If you hover over it, it's going to say TD element represents data cell in a table. There you go. So it's a cell. All right. So I'm defining a table once again. Then I say for row 1, I want you to have 2 cells. Now, what are the values that I want inside of those cells? Well, going back to my mockup, I would probably want it to say, well, the first one is going to say name and the other one is going to say Trevoir Williams. So in cell 1, I'm going to put the value name. And then inside of this cell, I can actually use different tags. So I could actually use a P tag, since I don't want to just type name because the way it's going to render might look different, but I want a P tag inside of the table data. So that being said, the table data now can house anything, right? The table data tag you can put any other kind of tag inside of the table data tag. If you want a link in there, if you want a paragraph, if you want an image, if you want a list, anything, but this is where the standard is. You have the table, you define a row, then you define the cell, and then you put the data inside of the cell. All right. So you don't want to define a row and then start writing the P tag here. That's wrong. You have to define a table data tag or a cell, and then you put whatever data you want inside of that cell. So the data I want in here is a P tag with the value name. All right. And then I'm going to show you guys a little trick. If I want my P tag or the text in the P tag to be bold, I can wrap it with a tag called strong. So I'll just open strong, so I have the P tag. Let me just start over. I have the P tag, and then inside of the P tag, I'm opening another tag called strong. Then I put my text after the open strong. Then I close the strong. So here's the strong, open and close, and all of that inside of the P tag. All right. And then that will give me bold text inside of a P tag. Next up, we have the actual data. So we just took care of name. And so the expectation is that when we do that with the strong on the cell, it should look more like this. So it's going to say name in bold and then the value in, not bold. So the value is now Trevoir Williams. So I'm just going to copy that quickly. And of course, it's your website. You put in your own information, but I'm going to start another P tag. So inside of the next cell, I put a P tag once again, and I put the text that is expected. Now, if I take a preview of this, and all of that just gave us one combination. So we have name in bold, and then we have Trevoir Williams to the next side. Now, it doesn't quite look like, notice there's no grid. There are no lines, like how in Microsoft Word we saw lines, and it doesn't quite look like how we probably envisioned it, but let us finish it and then we can style it. So let's go ahead and do the rest. So I defined the first row, which had my first cell, which had a P tag, and I just, spruced up the text a bit with the strong tag. And then I had my second cell, all of that in the same row. So if I wanted to move on now to defining date of birth, then I have to follow the same pattern. Date of birth is in another row. So I'm going to define another row. And then inside this row, I have 2 cells. So I know I have 2 cells. Before I start writing anything, I'm just going to duplicate that cell so that, it cuts down the time. I want to be efficient. I'm also just going to copy this tag that we did up here for name, paste it, and instead of name, I'm just going to replace it with date of birth, or maybe you can just write DOB for short. And then I'm going to do a P tag here. All right, so I just did that very quickly. Let me just show you that again. Using the emit abbreviations that Visual Studio Code gives us, we can just write the letter or start writing the word or the name of the tag. And then I press enter and it generates the rest of the tag for me, right? So once again, efficiency, I'm showing you all the tips and tricks so that you can do it more quickly. Also notice spacing out doesn't really matter. So when you space and everything is kind of indented, then it aids with readability. So I'm sure you can appreciate that it's easier to read this block of text than it is to read this one line, right? So really and truly, functionality functionality wise, they work the same way. The browser is going to render the same amount of code or the same bit of code. But when you, the developer, are looking back at it and trying to read it, decipher it, it's probably a bit easier on the eyes having it, well spaced out like this than having everything written in one line. All right, so I'm going to do it both ways. You just pick your preference. But then if I wanted to format this afterwards, I'm just going to go to each tag and press enter at the opening tag. And then for each closing tag, I'm just going to press enter, and you see Visual Studio kind of automatically indents everything for me anyway. All right, so I'm just showing you those little things to help you along the way. I did say let me just use a generic date. All right, that's my age, or my date of birth rather. And then the next one would be for the address, right? So my address is in another row. So I say TR, and then I have 2 cells. So TD times 2, right? I'm just going to copy the P tag that's already there. I just paste it. And then this one is going to say address. And then write my P tag in. And my address here is Caribbean. So I'm going to challenge you to go ahead and finish the rest. I'm just going to pause here, or you can pause the video here, finish the rest. I'm just going to go ahead and finish them up and then continue from there. All right, so I finished up my table, and in all, I ended up with about 5 rows: name, date of birth, address, profile, and favorite color. So if you just look at how the data is structured, you'd realize that the only 2 that are very close to each other side by side are favorite color and the word blue. But remember that earlier, before we put in all the others, name and the value that matches name were very close to each other. So what is happening is that each cell is kind of stretching as far as the content that is put in it wants it to stretch. So name is a small word, but then date of birth is a bigger word. So now the column that is facilitating all of those cells would have stretched to as much as the biggest value. All right. So at this point, favorite color would take up the most amount of space. So the whole column for all of these cells would have stretched to the width of this text. All right. And then in the same fashion, this profile, which is a nice long sentence, well, paragraph, however you want to look at it, is making this table cell stretch as far to the right as is required. So I can just go into my favorite tool, inspect element, and just show you the dimensions of the different parts of it. So if I look at the table, all of what is highlighted in blue, that represents our table. All right. And then when I go to TR, it's showing you that that is one of the rows. And then I have cell number 1 and cell number 2. Notice that the blue areas for both are stretching as far right as the section with the largest amount of content. So if I look at this row, which is the one that has the largest amount of content to the cell to the right, then you're going to see that it is stretching all as far out as possible, just so it can facilitate all of that text. All right. And just the same way for favorite color, with the most amount of text in the left, it's stretching as far as that text allows it. Also notice that everything is kind of structured. All of them are lining up in terms of the values. So it's not that name is going to be yay long and then this one is going to come short and then this one goes long. So it's not, it's not disorganized in its presentation. It's far more organized having used a table. Another thing to note is that we don't have any, we don't have any grid lines. So there are no borders on the table. So what do we need to use? If you said CSS, then you're on the right track. So let's go over to our code and bring up our CSS file, and then we can start writing styles for our tables or our table in this situation, right? So just continuing on this the CSS file, and I'm just going to put a comment to say table styles. So it's always good to kind of write comments so that you know that this section of the CSS file has styles for this purpose, right? I didn't quite do it above, but it's a learning process. So as we go along, I'll throw in little bits of advice so you can grow and see the context of it more. All right. So for the table styles, I have a few options here, and I'm going to use this opportunity to introduce classes. Now I can set up global styles for the table tags. I can just say table, because that's the name of the tag, open and close, and then start setting up global styles. But the reality is that many websites have many tables, and you don't want every single table to look the same way. So if I did it this way, as you would have seen with H1 and styling all of these tags together, and setting one global P formatting all of the tags everywhere that the table tag is going to appear would have that style, which is not necessarily what I want. All right. So what I can do is create what we call a class, which will act like it has a similar behavior to how the ID value works. So remember that when we talk about setting the ID on an element and then referencing it using the hashtag, it's going to go into the page, look for the exact element with that ID. So if I have ID nav, is going to look for an element with the ID called nav, and then target only that element and do whatever it's doing for that element and potentially the children of the element. Now, if I had multiple elements that I needed to have a particular style, and remember that no two elements should ever have the same ID, at least not on the same page, right? So I shouldn't have two elements on this one page with the ID container. That should never happen. However, if I had two completely different or two seemingly unrelated elements that needed to have the same style, but I didn't want to make it global, all right? So I need to style more than one elements, but I need to do so on a case-by-case basis, all right? So what I can do is create what we call a class, and then I can just reference that class on that case-by-case basis. So to create a class, I can say .info table, right? So the hashtag means ID. With no hashtag, it's going to be an element. So I can do the element by itself or by its name. I can use the hashtag to say any element with this ID, or I can use a dot. And if I hover over this, it will tell me that I'm creating a class. See? So I'm calling it info table. So I can give it any name I want. Of course, in keeping with our rules about naming, no spaces, etc. But when I'm defining this class, it allows me to then go and reference it on a case-by-case basis. So if I say info table and I define styles here, all I have to do for the element that I want to have the styles from info table is say class is equal to, and then reference info table. All right. So if there was another table, if I had 5 more tables and only 3 of them should have whatever style I'm about to define, then for each one, I just need to say class is equal to the class associated with the styles that I want to apply. So I've created the table. Well, sorry, I created the table. I created the class. Nothing is defined yet in the class, but I also made a reference to the class. So if I look back at my page, nothing has changed because I really haven't started doing anything as yet. Now, the first thing that I want to apply to my table is grid lines. So once again, in Word, we had these lines. We had set up grid lines on the table. So I want those grid lines on my table in my HTML display. So I'm going to say in CSS border, because I want a border, right? So we call it grid lines. Maybe you call it borders. I don't know, but in CSS it's border. So when we're defining a border, we need to say the width of the border. So I'm just going to keep it simple and say 1 pixel. I just want a thin line, just something to know that something is there. Then I have to define the style of border, and so I'm going to say solid. And then I want a color for the border, so I say black. Now, this is pretty standard. And if this is the first time you're doing it, then I figured that, okay, you really didn't know what to type, and that's fine. So W3 Schools is an excellent resource that if you need to know what to put in a table and how to style it, you go right there. You just look in the CSS section and look at CSS and tables, and then they will bring you through a bunch of examples. So once again, I always say, I don't expect you to memorize all these things. It's, almost impossible. It's not practical, right? So be prepared to research. Just have a goal in mind and look up on the resources given to you for that goal. All right. So by adding a border, and I'm saying 1 pixel solid black, what's going to happen is that I'm going to get 1 box. So notice I have the box. So the bordering is beginning, but that's still not quite what I want. I would probably want to see grid lines inside of the actual box. So this is the box. So it's giving me the box because I defined the class, and I'm only calling the class on the table. So remember I said that everything is contained in the table. So the table is the box. But I really need it to be applied to the rows and the cells inside of the box, or at least the cells inside the box, because the row, cell implies a row. Because if you have 3 cells, then that's as many cells as you have that make up a row. So I really need them applied to the cells that are inside of the table. So reusing our previous example where I could style, multiple tags just using commas, I could say that I want info table and I want anything that is a TD to also have this, or I can say dot info table TD to say that, okay, I want the table itself and I want any table data or any cell inside of any element with the class info table. So now it's kind of getting advanced. So I hope I'm not losing you here. Remember that earlier we could have styled parts of the nav. So we styled the nav, right? We targeted the element firstly, right? But then I said, I wanted the anchor tags inside of the nav. And see, we did it here with the P tag inside of the footer. So target that particular element, but look for whatever is inside of that element that is an anchor tag or whatever tag I'm defining, right? So down here, I'm saying, yes, I have a class called info table. So any table that inherits this class or any element that inherits this class info table will get a border that matches this description. However, I want that the table data or the cells or anything that is a table data tag that is inside of an element using the info table class will also get this style. So the comma just acts like how it acted with the H1, the H2, comma H3 through 6 here, where it's just all of these are just sharing the style. So I'm saying that the table itself should have the border and the table data tags inside of the table should also have this border. All right. So when I do that and I go back, you see now that it's looking a bit more like what we want, but still not quite there because then I'm seeing that there's this little gap in between. So what's happening is that we have the box that the table has, and then each cell literally is getting its own box, right? So you see name is getting its own box and the value associated with it is getting its own box. So then there's a CSS selector value pair that we can use that where I can say border dash collapse is equal to collapse. All right. So when I do that, it's literally just going to crunch everything together and it's going to look much neater than it did before. Now, once you're doing this, you can actually apply almost any kind of style you want. So I only want to style stuff inside of the TD tag inside of the info table. So I can literally just go down a line below, define info table, TD by itself, and apply more styles. So it's already going to share the styles that are defined here, but then I want to do other things in this that I don't need to say inside of info table. All right. So other things I would probably want to do would be like to, let's say we want to align text align. So you can say text dash align, everything center. And this, I don't think this is going to look very good, but just to show you it's possible. All right. Another common practice would be to actually maybe say that the table should have a width of 100%. So that way it fills the entire screen. And we already looked at the benefit of using percentage instead of pixels. So it is almost relative to the screen, but then you notice now that everything is kind of out of whack because the value to the left is stretching to 100%. And that's because they are sharing the styles. So you have to be very careful when sharing the styles because I'm saying width equal 100%. So yes, the width is equal to 100%, but then it's also setting the TD width to be 100%. So while you can share styles, it will be a time like this that I would say, okay, darn, I need to separate them, right? So what I'm going to do is just take out the references to info table TD. So I already have it down here. And then I'm just going to copy the code. So I'm going to take the border code and I'm also going to put it down inside the individual definition for info table TD. So if you prefer just separating them from the get-go, that's fine. All right, there's no problem and there's no shame in it. But as you gather experience, you're going to realize that you don't have to write a particular style 10 different times because of that, right? So when I take it out and fix it, now you're seeing that everything is stretching a bit better. However, I think that a lot of bias is being given to the right-hand side a bit more than the left-hand side, right? So what I'm going to do is go back and then I'm going to tell the TDs. So the table itself is 100%, but for any TD, I'm telling it that its width should be 50%. So whatever space the table itself or info table is taking up, the cell should only take up 50% of that. And so when I go back, you're going to see a more even split, right? So it's now 50 on this side and 50 on the other side. I'm going to modify the border. So I'm not really fond of having the grid lines. I really don't like it. So you're going to see like modern tables, they kind of design them to just have like a bottom border and it's usually a softer color. So I'm not going to put the border on the table itself. So I'm just going to comment this out and leave it there for reference, right? But then for the cell itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say border dash bottom. So you can actually say border dash left, border dash right, and you can style each part of the border separately, right? Or you can just say border and it applies to all four corners. So I'm going to say that I want 1 pixel solid and I'm going to change this from black and use this shade of gray. All right. And when I go back, then you're going to see that, okay, the shade of gray is kind of light. So you can barely see, but then you see that the accent of gray, and it kind of looks a bit neater to me than when, everything was in this big old box. Right? So, there are a number of things you can do with tables. I'm just going to show you another way that we could have done this, where maybe if it was a grid, the title of the row. So let's say you had multiple persons. You wouldn't necessarily create a table to show the data for multiple persons like this with name to the left and the value to the right. You'd probably have table headings. So like think of an Excel spreadsheet where you would have table headings and then you would have multiple rows and each row has the data to go with the heading, right? So I'm just going to show you how that would look. So it's the same table syntax, right? So I'm just going to, underneath this table, I'm just going to break the line twice or thrice. And then I'm just going to do another table and show you a different way we could have written this table. So I'm going to say table. All right. And then I'm going to define one row, and this row is going to have all of the headings. So I'm just going to use the same headings, quote unquote headings from my previous table, which would be name, date of birth, address, profile, and favorite color. So instead of saying TD, because I'm not dealing with data this time, I'm dealing with the headings, there's a tag called TH. So inside of TH, I can say name, and I'm just going to duplicate it about 5 times because I have 5 headings. right? So TH for name, then TH for date of birth, and then I'm going to say TH for address. I'm going to flip it up a bit and say favorite color this time. And then instead of profile, I'm just going to say description, right? So then I have a table row with some headings. Then I have table rows, and I'm going to have TD tags that match back with each heading, right? So I have 5 headings. The expectation is that I'm going to have 5 data points for each heading. So I'm going to do 2 rows like this just to show you. So I'm just going to copy that one, paste it. So I have 2 rows. So I have the first one with the headings, and then I have 2 more rows, and it could be as many other rows as you need, right? But then this time I'm listing all people's information. So this one could be Angie Bullock, and date of birth is January 3, 2010. All right. Address, she lives in Jamaica. Favorite color is red, and her description is that she's tall. All right. Then you have John Gibson, and then he's born February 3, 2011. All right. Also from Jamaica, and the favorite color is, well, black isn't really a color, but let's just work with it. And his description is that he's short. All right. So if I look at this table structure on the same page, you're going to see the difference. So this one was the side by side, right? Where I just all I did was put these in a strong. So there was nothing special here. I just put P tag. I just wrapped this one in a strong so it stood out a bit more. However, without doing that, look at the text below. So this is our table structure, and this is probably more like what you'd be used to if you were looking at a list of, say, employees, or a list of students, or a list of something, of persons. You would see the headings and notice that they're already in bold, right? I didn't put them in bold. The only difference here was that I said TH for the first row, and then every other row got TD. Also notice that the table looks, it looks a bit dyslexic. It needs to be styled a bit, right? So I can easily, if I want this table to have similar properties to this table, then I can just easily go to this table, and I already have all of the properties defined in my class.info table. So I can, on a case-by-case basis, say that, okay, I want this table to look like an info table. And then by doing that, it just automatically reformats. Now, there are some discrepancies here, and like I said, case-by-case basis. So info table worked perfectly for this layout. You can see that it's kind of struggling for the second layout. So the problem here is that mathematically, I can't have 5 cells. Notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. I can't have 5 columns stretching out across 50%, each one getting 50%. That's not mathematically, possible. So with 2 columns, sure, 50%, 50%. With 5 columns, no. So this is where I could go ahead and define a separate class, and this one is probably list table and not info table. So you're not restricted to the number of classes, and there's literally the only restriction is yourself. All right. So I have one for info table, and I'm going to create another one for list table. So I'm going to take similar options where I'm going to say that I want the width to be 100% and the border to be collapsed. All right, so this is the definition for list table. And then I want dot list table, so any TD tag inside of list table, as well as any TH tag. So I have to say dot list table again, and then I'm list table, so 2 T's, sorry. So that's very important. Spelling is very important. All right, so any TD tag in list table as well as any TH tag in list table, I want them to have width. If I have 5 columns, then that's 20%, right? 520s would be 100. So, just do some quick math and figure out the optimal spacing for them. And then when I do that and refresh, oh, well, I wrote the style, but I didn't put it in the HTML. I didn't reference it, right? So it's still looking at info table. So I need to go back and tell it you're no longer info table. You're now referencing the class list table. And then everything is going to kind of snap into place. See that? So now everything is kind of even, far more even. So you can create a class based on what you need in the moment. You're not restricted to having one class and trying to make it work. So in this situation, that class worked. All the styles I applied to this class, they worked out. But then in this situation, I needed a different touch. So I defined it accordingly. So I can do other things. Like I can say in this situation, in list table, I want all of my text center aligned. So I'm going to align all of them in the center. You can see the headers were already aligned, but now the data is center aligned along with the headers, right? I can also say that I could do a similar border. So we already looked at how we would set up that grid. So you could make it look like an Excel spreadsheet or that kind of grid like we saw in Microsoft Word, where you could just put in the border with the one pixel solid lines. But I actually like the simpler one where it's just a row. I can add a bit more padding to the table. So I'm going to say padding is about 10 pixels. So it has, a bit more breadth, and I can add a margin. So remember that the padding pushes borders away from the content that's inside, whereas the margin, so I'm going to say margin, give it a 5 pixel margin. So remember, padding works just like border. You can define one border with one set of values and it goes to all quadrants, or you can be specific where you say border dash bottom, or you can say padding dash bottom, padding dash top, left or right, same with margin, right? So by just saying padding and margin, it's setting it in all quadrants. And then when I go back and look, I see, okay, there's a margin. So it has a little more daylight from there, and a little daylight. Well, I only said 5 pixels. So let me increase that to maybe 15 so you can see a better difference or a bigger difference. You see that it has a more space away from the next content, and you see that it has those lines similar to how this one had the lines. Notice though the text is not gray, right? It's still black. And the reason it's black is that I didn't put the text in p tags. So that's why it's important to put your content inside of tags, because then that gives you better control over how you want your content to look. So I'm almost restricted now. I can't really style the way I want my text to look. So it's actually better for me to just wrap them inside of p tags, right? So, oh, that failed. I'm sorry. All right, so it's better to just wrap your tags or your text inside of p tags when putting them inside of a table. Either way, in the CSS, I'm going to put some padding on the cells themselves so that the cell takes up, it has a bigger, it has a bit more breadth away from the content itself. So I'm going to say I want a padding of 10 pixels. And then if we look back at the example, then we will see that, there's a bit more space now, right? So now it looks a bit better than it did before, not so choked up. All right, so let's just review what we did. So in this lesson, we started looking at tables. So I'm just going to, for more context, say about us page with 2 tables. All right. And then I'm also going to say that I want to center align that H1 tag. So let me see. I may not want every single H1 tag centered, right? So I could just create a class. See that? You can create a class at will and say center title, right? And then I'm just going to say text dash align, and then I want it center. So this does nothing until it's referenced. So I'm just going to say, okay, wherever I have an H1 tag that I want to center, I'm just going to give it a class, center title, and then it will be obedient to what the class is saying it should do. All right. So that's how classes work. So let's just go again. So in this video, we reviewed one, setting up tables. All right, we looked at the table tag, the TR tag, the TD tag, and why it is important to use at least P tags when it's text-based, or the fact that any other tag can go inside, but that structure has to be maintained. The table, then the row, and then the cell. And then having defined the cell, we can put any content in there, whether it's text, even a picture or a link, right? So we looked at having the table set up, and one with 5 rows and 2 columns versus one with 2 rows and 5 columns each. So we looked at the TH, which is table header, which is usually used as the heading for whatever data is about to follow. And then the fact that the TD is just the cell that the data is being stored in. And while looking at all of this, we looked at the power of classes. So we reviewed the fact that a class allows us to define our own CSS for our own context and then reference it on a case-by-case basis. So this can be used when we don't have the option of globally styling the entire tag like we would do with the P tag or the H1 tag. We can't globally style it because we don't want every single one of them to look that way. We also don't have the option of using IDs unless we're going to probably end up repeating code a lot, right? Because then you would have to define a new ID for each one and then redefine the same set of styles in each case, which you don't want to do. So we looked at using a class, right? So let me just say CSS class, right? So we use a full stop and then we give it a name, and then we can define all of the styles we want. And then when we need it, we can just say class is equal to, and then make reference to it. All right. We also looked at the fact that we can also style elements that are inside of, or other tags that are inside of whatever parent element is making reference to the class. So in this case, we applied styles directly to the table data tags that are inside of whatever element is inheriting info table. So I hope you enjoyed this one. We did quite a bit of work here looking at tables. And if there's anything that is still unclear to you, feel free to reach out to me and let me know, and I'll be sure to help you out.